G'day. Welcome to the AgriCoach podcast for families on the land who want to grow their family's wealth and prosperity across the generations. I'm your host, Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. G'day. Welcome back to the AgriCoach Wealth and Wisdom podcast, where we tackle some of the biggest challenges facing farming families, helping you build resilience, create wealth, and set up your family for long-term success. I'm your host, Ben Law, and today we're diving into two of the most important global shifts that will impact agriculture for decades to come. I've got a guest who should need no introduction, John Anderson, former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, multi-generational farmer, and host of the Conversations with John Anderson podcast, one of the most influential political and cultural podcasts in Australia, with over 700,000 YouTube subscribers, and individual episodes often reach over millions of views. John has spent decades at the forefront of Australian politics and agriculture, and today we're tackling two massive global shifts that could change the future of farming for generations. First, we're diving into what we call the breakdown of the liberal world order, which is the post-war system that shaped trade, global markets, and economic stability. It's now fracturing, and as nationalism and protectionism rise, Australian agriculture is facing some big challenges. Will our export markets hold? And how do farmers prepare for increasing uncertainty? Then we're going to pivot into what we call the population bomb. Not overpopulation, but the accelerating global decline in birth rates. So what happens when the world starts running out of people? How will this impact food production, labour markets, and the very future of Australian farming? This is going to be an insightful, big picture conversation with what I believe is one of Australia's deepest thinkers. So let's get into it. John Anderson, welcome to the podcast.
Ben, it's great to be with you. I've been looking forward to it. We've been talking about doing this for quite a while, so the day's finally arrived.
It has, yes. And it's taken a little bit of time to get us organised. And I think you were the first person I spoke to when I was about to start my podcast 3.5 years ago. And I've been listening to yours for a long time, so I've very much looked forward to this.
Me too.
Now, John, I just want to start out with your background because you've got a really interesting background. I look at you, you're a farmer from only about 100 k's down the road from where I grew up, where my parents are on the farm. Then you went into a stint in politics and ended up becoming the ex-Deputy PM of Australia, which is the pinnacle of your career. Then you went back to something a little bit, probably some people would say a more honourable profession, and went back to farming. And then all of a sudden, and I think in about 2017, you became a YouTuber or a podcaster. Now, if you were in your teens and you're a teenager, I'd say, oh, that's a normal transition. What was the inflection point that took you from farmer to podcaster and YouTuber, John?
Well, there was an inflection point farming-wise. My son came back. He's now in his mid-30s and married, and he and his wife were very keen to take over. And so that was one inflection point, and that's terrific. And it's a really sort of contented phase of my life to essentially be a farm labourer when I'm around and I can be useful. Don't have to make any major decisions. But the other inflection point was watching the world deteriorate and break up and wondering how on earth I could try and bring a bit more information and wisdom into the public arena in a way that wasn't about me, but which gave people the opportunity to access top quality thinking of the sort that I thought was important, and often thinking that doesn't get the platforming it should do across a range of things. We have done quite a bit of agriculture over the times, but a lot of philosophy, a lot of politics, a lot of economics, a lot of defence, cultural stuff. And we found there's, a mate and I thought, well, we'll have a go at this and see if we just can't play a role in the public arena. We agreed then I'd give the time, he'd make up any shortfall. I say that because they've never broken even, and that's not our objective. It's not about money. It is genuinely about an attempt to say, I really love this country. We're losing our way. We don't seem to have the drive and the energy to do the things that need to be done. We won't delay gratification. All of your farm listeners will know that there are times when you've got to say, we're going to do a few less holidays and focus a bit more on getting the farm into the best possible financial shape. Well, Australia seems to be on holiday, and I think we're paying a real price for it. But I was worried about the global outlook as well when we started. It all kicked off with the Professor of History and Economics, Neil Ferguson, and he and I and a friend were talking. I said to him, would you let me record a conversation, some of the things we've been talking about. He said yes. We actually launched with Jordan Peterson, who was relatively unknown at the stage, but he said to me, he made a vital point. He said, young people are just as interested in ideas and content as ever, just that they don't read books. They want their content in different ways. And so we did a conversation and that put us on the map. I think we're on 245 million YouTube downloads now.
Yeah, that's amazing, John. I mean, you can't even imagine, I'm guessing back in 2017 when you kicked off, that you'd be anywhere near there. It's such an interesting thing. And I know when I started my podcast, a lot of people, and that was sort of 3 or 4 years ago, looked at me and said, why would farmers listen to podcasts? These aren't the people that are interested.
Oh, yes, they are.
They do, yeah. And that's what I said. I said, well, they spend so much time in cars, in tractors. And I remember the day that I had someone ring me up and say, Ben, I've been listening to your podcast, and all I could hear in the background was clip, clop, clip, clop, clip, clop. And he was mustering bulls up in the central Queensland. And so that was what really triggered it for me, that people are hungry for information and not just about farming necessarily. So now, John, one thing that I heard you say a number of years ago, and I'll be honest, I had to go Google it at the time. This was about 4 years ago. And you said that you were really concerned about a breakdown in the liberal world order. And I remember thinking, what the hell does that actually mean? Googled it, figured it out. That's great. But that's something you talk about a lot. So for the younger people listening out there, they probably, like me, didn't know what that actually means and why it's important not only to us, but also to agriculture. So can you tell me, what do you mean by a breakdown in the liberal world order?
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is that some of your older listeners will also be interested and they'll be worried. What is that bloke talking about a global order again? We don't want to know about global orders. That's an older debate. What I mean by it is that there have always been global orders. Basically, the superpower of the day has the premier say in what happens in the world. And so you've got to go back into history. What have we had that's now breaking down? It came out of the horrors of the Second World War when the Allies finally defeated Nazi Germany and Japan. They were exhausted, but they'd won. And the amazing leaders of the day, particularly, I would say, Churchill, Truman by then, he'd taken over from Roosevelt in America, but also their great generals and so forth, men like Eisenhower, men like George C. Marshall, Lord Allenbrook in England. They got together and said, this has been the most shocking thing. 60 million people have died. Our cities have been bombed out. Europe's a wreck. Japan's a wreck. What do we do? And they basically said 3 things. No more Holocausts, no more world wars, and we will not turn our back on injustice and poverty in the world anymore, because that just creates disasters. Fairness matters. They put their money where their mouth is. They helped set up the state of Israel. That's being lost in the current debate. But after the Holocaust, there was a broad agreement that we've got to try and make sure this doesn't happen again. And they need some sort of homeland. I think that would be a fair thing to say. Secondly, they said, we've got to set up a new financial order that was known as Bretton Woods, and it served us very well, and a body to try and prevent breakdown, and that was the United Nations. Started out well, in my views, now turned into a disaster, or turning into one. And thirdly, they said, let's get serious. And Australia has really punched above its weight here in trying to address poverty, deprivation, all the rest of that stuff. And it hasn't always been perfect, far from it. But of course, it has been an order. And we won out over the Soviets with the falling of the Berlin Wall, and everybody thought democracy's safe. And we've had a great period of expansion until the great financial crisis started to challenge everything. And the bit that's interesting for agriculture is that under that sort of order, it's just known as the liberal global order by academics and so forth, but under that system, trade's opened up. That's been greatly to the advantage of Australian agriculture. But here's the thing that not many people know, and you've got to go digging deep for the research. By participating in global agricultural research and by sharing our knowledge, we've helped dramatically reduce the number of people in poverty, dramatically improve the living standards of a lot of people in a lot of economies, and they have then become tremendous markets for us. So we've done the right thing by helping people with our knowledge. I mean, think the Green Revolution in Asia from the early 60s on. Just amazing, the difference. It basically doubled lifespans, created whole new markets for us. And so we did well by participating. A lot of people benefited from it, but so did we as Australian farmers. Is it breaking down? Well, yes, the Middle East. So the bit about a safe place for Jewish people and rising anti-Semitism tell you that's broken down. America is no longer fully capable and predictable as the world's policeman. Trade is breaking down, and our commitment as we all get poorer, because we are, to lifting people out of poverty and then having them turn into good markets, that's under challenge. So a long answer, but the short version of it is that we're now moving into very unpredictable waters, and I'm very concerned about what it might mean, because I like stability and I love this country, and I think we're so fortunate to live in it, and I don't want to see it undermined or challenged or subject to, ever declining living standards or whatever it is.
It's interesting because, as a country, I suppose you'd say, is we've really benefited from stability. So two things is I would see stability. So when you've got stability, you've got solid markets you can generally rely on. And then the second thing is as people around the world become wealthier, their standard of living increases, then they start buying higher value agricultural inputs. So they start eating more beef, and then we can actually access those markets. So it's been this rising tide for agriculture over and over again to be able to produce more. And we are an export country. We're not an internal consumer mostly. Most of our beef is exported. So when do you see it started to unravel, shall we say? Where did the wheels start to get a little bit wobbly, would you say?
You've built a scaled, highly profitable operation you're proud of. But what will your legacy really be? If you're 5 to 15 years from succession, now's the time to step back, get clear, and design the next chapter with your family, not just for them. That's exactly what you'll do at the High Performing Families Roadmap Workshop, back this July after overwhelming demand. In 2 days off farm, you'll design your family's 10-year roadmap, align on what matters most, and set a clear plan your whole family can get behind. No fluff, no drama, just strategy, clarity, and serious progress. If you want in, head to agricoach.com.au/take action. Spots are limited. Now, let's get back to the episode.
I would say the first serious warning shot was actually 9/11. So you've got to remember the Berlin Wall came down in 1990 and everyone thought democracy had won out. The American academic Francis Fukuyama wrote the book, The End of History and Its Democracy. And democracy was in the upswing. It's now on the downswing. It really is. It's on the downswing around the world. And everyone had thought, right, well, apart from anything else, we can take the peace dividend. We can spend less on guns and more on butter, more on benefits, less on defence. But the more immediate effect, I remember those days very clearly because actually John Howard was out of the country and I was acting PM. It showed us that there were people who loathed democracy and loathed our way of life and thought that actually we were degenerate and bad. And it should have been the giant wake-up call that you always need to be vigilant. It also, though, frightened governments into thinking there could be a serious recession, and it began the loosening of credit, particularly in America, that ultimately were triggered initially by the failure of Lehman Brothers. No one went to jail for what Lehman Brothers did, yet what they did was grossly financially irresponsible, and it exposed and then triggered a major collapse around very irresponsible banking practices around the world, and the banking system globally nearly collapsed. People don't realise how close run a thing it really was, and that would have been a disaster. But we clawed our way through, and we've been seriously weakened since. That is the reality. Governments have built up out of control debts. Australia started from a position of having no debt. I was part of the government that actually did that. It was very hard work. It was very significant. We left money in the bank. The Future Fund, Peter Costello's just finished up a term running it, having set it up. And that has been and will be of great benefit in the future. Our debt to GDP ratio is headed to around 40%. That's when most Western countries have lost control of their budgets. And countries like America, Britain, many European countries are at around 100 to 120% debt to GDP. And at that level, you're really stifling growth. And it's really hard to find options. It's really hard to find the money you need to do to step up on defence or invest properly in your education and your infrastructure. So it's really quite serious. And into that vacuum has sort of flowed the belief, if you like, from other rising powers And people talk about the amalgam now that's emerging between China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia. They have almost nothing in common with each other, but they have one thing in common. They believe that we are weak and degenerate. They've flowed into the weakening that we have oversighted in our own cultures and economies. I am deeply worried about that. I'm an old guy, but I'm very deeply invested in the future because I've got 4 children I love to bits and grandchildren that I love to bits. And they're the future. I don't know why we don't talk about that anymore. Any country that believes in itself wants a future, and children are our future.
It's interesting. I like to use this word character a lot, John. I look at the Australian people. Character was a really important thing. You know, there was that toughness, that was mateship. It was looking after your friends. And I think I probably got more of that growing up in the bush because that's the way we sort of operate in the bush. And I remember listening to you, and we just touched on this before we kicked off with Patrick David, the podcast you did in America a while ago. And I remember listening to it at the time. You started off somewhere in the line of what the bloody hell happened to the Australians? And it became really clear that when especially COVID was on, we seemed to have struggling like the rest of the world with this real weakness of character as a group. I think individually we're probably right. Is that something you've seen change dramatically since over your lifetime, or am I a little bit off kilter there?
I'd like to think you are off kilter. Regrettably, I think the answer lies in the fact that there are still many Australians of great character, but we have become somehow a bit indolent. Yeah, Patrick Bet-Davis, a very interesting American success story. He was born in Iran. His family fled. They went to Germany, then to California. He reckons he was a wasted kid till he did his national service. That woke him up. He then started an insurance business. He developed 60 offices across America, sold them, became obviously very well off. He now runs a private media and communications outfit. And he asked me on for 2 hours, Florida. And I went and sat in his studio, and he peppered me. The topic was whatever happened to the Aussies, because Americans love Australians. They really do. And they know a bit about us. They don't, often Americans are very insular, but they know a little bit about us and they love us. But they're saying, where was the kickback during COVID? Because the imagery they got was particularly out of Victoria of, mothers in pajamas being, marched out by police for daring to question COVID regulations. Where was the Australian spirit? There's an old saying, apparently, about Australians that they're formidable in war but lazy in peacetime. And I would never be one of those people who would say maybe we need a good war to sort things out. I have heard people in the bush say that, but none of us mean it or believe it. But maybe there's a bit of truth in the old saying that, people of character create good times create people of no character, and it takes people of good character to bring it back up. And we need a bit of that at the moment in Australia. I really do believe that. I can't believe we're letting our debt control. It just spend. And there's a piece in today's paper from one of our best journalists referring to some research that shows that actually the Australian people are sick of politicians spending too much. They get that it's driving inflation, that it's weakening the economy, that we're borrowing actually from our children and our grandchildren. They get that. But nobody's really stepping up and saying this has got to stop like we did, frankly, in 1996. And we did. And we weren't very popular for it for quite a while. But then the benefits started to flow. Interest rates came down. Real living standards started to rise. We entered a boom time. I can't get why we can't shake off our lethargy about defence. Here we are with our politicians saying these are the most dangerous times since the 1930s. We're getting clear messages now that you can't look to Big Brother Britain or Big Brother America to come riding in over the horizon. So what are we doing? Right now, as you and I speak, we are presiding in this country over a weakening, not a strengthening, a weakening of our defence force. And they all say, we'll have submarines. Yeah, in about 10 years' time. Right now, we're facing the danger. Right now, our defence capabilities are slipping away. And young people in the defence forces, A, they're reluctant to go in, and B, it's very hard to retain them. So you've got the Navy mothballing ships. We haven't got many ships, but we're mothballing some of them because we haven't. We've got shortages everywhere, including in capable personnel.
Well, even fuel. We've got no stores of fuel anywhere.
I'll have a gentle shot at Aussie farmers, my colleagues in arms here. They ought to be absolutely up in arms about this. They ought to be tearing down the walls of government saying, hey, listen, we feed you blighters. And if something goes wrong, it doesn't have to be a war. It only has to be a crippling of our inbound shipping and our trade shut down. Our ability to export our products shut down. Our income is compromised. Worse than that, we won't be able to feed you for more than a little while because you've only got very limited fuel storage, very, very limited. Nothing like adequate. And what's not understood, it's not just that we haven't got enough. It's in the wrong places.
Yeah. And it's interesting, John. I remember seeing when you were doing the budget, I think you were called the Razor Gang, weren't you? There was a lot of really bad publicity back then. And I think you shared with me 4 or 5 years ago, you said we were going through on the budget line by line, every line on the budget saying, what can we keep? What can we get rid of? Because you wanted to live within your means. And it takes me back to something that someone said to me a while ago. If you choose short-term comfort, it almost always leads to long-term suffering. And I think this is the thing we've forgotten as a society, I sense, is this ability to say, look, we need to suck it up. We need to do it tough for a short period of time, and that's going to yield great dividends or returns later on. And, using many of the policies that we're dealing with today and many of the things we're dealing around the world is it's all about short-term comfort. Whereas if I look at my grandfather or my great-grandfather, I look at them when they came back from the First World War, etc., they were used to hardship. So the hardships they had to suffer were nothing in comparison. Whereas today, we just as a society don't seem to be able to say, well, we need to suck it up. We need to do it tough for a short period of time to right the ship, and then off we go. It's just not politically palatable in any way, shape or form.
I would say that it's not just that we lack the toughness, that we lack the moral compass. What do I mean by that? I'll give you 2 examples of the recklessness, just in some raw numbers. We did not have a national disability insurance scheme until a few short years ago. And I recognise fully, and there will be some of your listeners who will know how important it is that we help families and people who are carers and what have you, helping those who are disabled. But from a scheme that didn't exist in a few short years, we've gone to one that is so expensive that it now costs more than the pharmaceutical benefits scheme and our health budget together. And 11% of our male children in this country are on an NDIS package. 11%. And many of them, the experts will tell you, need different help, not NDIS they really need. I won't go there, it's other things. But you contrast that with the fact, as I just mentioned a moment ago on defence, the current government has managed, while they're spending all that money on social programs, to rescope, that's code for defer, way up into the future, $83 billion of defence spending. 83 billion. Whereas I actually think they should have not only left the 83 billion there, they should have added another 83 billion. Because in the end, the first responsibility of the government is our security. So it's our security from cyber interference, it's military defence, it's also economic security. Economic security is vital. Why is it moral? A matter of morality, because it goes to our children. We're not living within our means. We're actually piling debts because we won't live within our means on our kids and our grandkids. Many of your rural listeners will know, A, what it is to work hard, B, what it is to defer the holidays and the nice motor car and all the rest of it. They will know what it is, too, to try and set things up for future generations. I think farmers are amongst the most, by and large, with exception, environmentally conscious people I know. They're very committed to stewardship over their land, and they're very committed to trying to set something up for their kids. And these are the sort of values that I still think, if we could find better ways to do it, that rural Australians can impart to the broader community. I believe that very strongly.
And someone said it, I remember hearing, John, and it might have even been on your podcast a long time ago, as they said, so many people don't get involved in politics these days. And I understand why. I mean, it's turned into something that I think had a fair bit of honour attached into some pretty murky waters these days. And someone said once, if you abdicate responsibility in a society, someone will come in and fill that. Actually, it might have been Jordan Peterson, and it'll usually be the narcissists and the psychopaths that'll want to come in and fill those gaps. What do you think's led to us realistically? Because you served for a long term. What do you think's led to people just not wanting to get involved at all? And because I think eventually what's going to hit the fan and people are going to all of a sudden have to start standing up. Why do you think there's such a reluctance these days, John?
The first thing I want to say to you and your listeners is I kind of don't understand why. I've got 4 kids and they don't want to step up into the public limelight and all the rest of it because they see the downside. I can understand why people don't want to do it. The second thing I want to say is, the old saying, you want evil to prosper, all it requires is good people to remain silent. We need to be engaged. The third thing is, it's not just politics, although it is politics that really suffers. It's everything. It's not the age when people commit. It's not the age when they join things. Probably have a go locally, for example, the local bushfire brigade or whatever it is. But, there is a need for good people to be engaged, even when it's frustrating. In fact, that's the reason you need to be engaged, when you see the wrong people dominating your local branch activities and the party of your choice or whatever it is. And somebody who really put some numbers around this, forgive me if you've heard me quote this before, a couple of years ago I did a conversation with Lord Jonathan Sumption. He's a very distinguished former Supreme Court judge in Britain, so, a really top-class mind. And he was talking about this issue of disengagement. And he said that for decades after the Second World War, till quite recently actually, the British Labour Party had 1.1 million on average card-carrying members, branch members and what have you. And the Conservatives had about 1.9, and it was quite stable. About 3 million Brits belonged to the political party of their choice. He said today, and this is 2 years ago, it might have changed, but he said the Royal Society of Birdwatchers in Britain has more members than the political parties combined, which at one level you can understand, and they probably have more fun than all the rest of it. But as I said to a Queenslander who's now served with some distinction, this is probably 10 years ago, I met him out near Injune, of all places, and we're having a yarn. He said, I'd like to have a go at politics. And I said, okay, we'll go and join the political party of your choice and then go to a few branch meetings and then ring me up and say, you really want me to get a bunch of these self-absorbed sort of people that fight over. So 3 or 4 months later, he rang. He said, I'm making that phone call. I joined up. I've been to a few branch meetings. They don't seem very interested in the bigger picture. And I said, no, you know why you need it. And he went on to serve with some distinction, which is great.
Yeah, it's a real disengagement, isn't it, in pretty much everything. I don't know if the problem's too big. I don't know whether we're just in a time where people aren't, people don't care about the barbarians until they're actually at the gate. And I get a sense that economically, after the GFC, the debt levels we're seeing around the world, the complete lack of ability to be able to control our spending as a society across all levels is essentially where the barbarians are starting to come at the gate.
Well, your listeners might like, if they haven't heard of him, picking up on Konstantin Kissin. I've had him on my podcast a couple of times, but he's a Russian who lives in Britain and was a comedian. And then he thought things were so serious, I'll start saying serious things. And in a brilliant speech, you can find it, just look up Konstantin Kissin, ARC, London 2023. And he made the comment, he said, we thought the barbarians were at the gate, but now we find they're actually in our midst. It's late in the day. So if your listeners think I'm saying, please, we need you, stand up, your country needs you. Yeah, I am saying that, Ben. I am. We need good people. I went to Longreach a few years ago, had a terrific time. Gracing for Profit was running a sort of leaders' school out there. And about 140 people, and a lot of them were from Queensland, but a lot were not. And they asked me just to give a bit of an overview of what I thought was happening to the global economy. And, what a great group of people. They were just fantastic. But one of the things as they questioned, and as we talked over meals later and so forth, that I realised was that their parents and their grandparents would have been involved in politics. They were not. They're just as interested as ever. Maybe they're just disillusioned or don't see a role. And I just want to say, at one level I see that and I get it. At another level I say, we need you. Seriously. Think about what you can do.
Because we can't rely on the fact that markets will stay stable and agriculture will be looked after by the political class anymore, because we don't have a strong agricultural voice like back in your day advocating for farmers and graziers. And, you only have to hear the rhetoric coming out of a lot of the environmental side and what happened in the UK recently with inheritance tax. The big changes there is there's almost a disdain in many of these countries for agriculture. We're talking about deforestation, carbon, all those sorts of things. So I think farmers are going to get to the point where they're going to have to stand up again and say, enough's enough. We need to get involved. We need to influence this rather than just abdicating the responsibility. And I just want to be clear for anyone listening, there are still a lot of people doing this. I'm not, I know there's a lot of people out there pushing hard, but I think as an industry, they're going to have to get together and have one voice and really push hard for agriculture.
I agree with that. And you need good representatives around the cabinet table where the decisions are made. And I do fear as we speak, Ben, I'm not sure when this will go to air, but I do fear the prospect of a hung parliament dragging us further to the left and further down the road of big government, never-ending spending, a tax on industry, high interest rates. I genuinely fear it.
Yeah, well, we can see that all around the world, what's happening. I mean, we're not thinking about how you make money. We just think about how you spend it. That seems to be the focus.
Yeah, don't worry about making a pie. Just divide it up into ever smaller bits.
Yeah, exactly. Now, another topic, John, I want to touch on, which I've heard mentioned a few times before. I think it was definitely something that was talked about at the ARC conference over in London you were involved in, and that was the population issues. And we've been talking I feel like the public narrative for a long time is population. We're going to overpopulate the earth. The earth's not going to be able to handle the population and it's all going to come crashing down in a god-awful heap. But it was Elon Musk, I think I first heard it through. John, he talked about it. And so we've got this issue now where we're starting to see population declines. And I think South Korea might have one of the worst in the world. And this is something you've been fairly passionate about talking about. So the question I've got out there, or I want to pose out there, is what is this population bomb we're starting to hear about? And should people in the agricultural industry actually be taking notice?
So the last part of the question, should we be taking notice in agriculture? The answer is unquestionably yes. But I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what that means. We've just got to be aware that it's happening. I could talk on this forever, and yet I'm not the expert. Funnily enough, one of the Australian experts on this is Peter Costello, because he started looking at the demographic time bomb in Australia. It wasn't called that then, but the intergenerational report, how we were an ageing society. Why are we an ageing society? It's because we're having less children. Nicholas Eberstadt is an American who's coined the term depopulation bomb. And it is a bit of a wake-up call that suddenly, for decades, centuries, we've been saying there's too many of us. Club of Rome in the 1960s, there's too many of us. We have to have a thing called lifeboat ethics. Planet Earth's sinking because there's so many of us. The lifeboat's going down, so we've got to throw a few people overboard. And Jordan Peterson got onto this, and it was the first time he mentioned to me he was thinking about doing something like ARC. He said, this is a terrible idea. I said, yeah, it was called lifeboat ethics. Too many of us, so you got to throw a few people overboard to save the others. I said, would you like to be thrown overboard, or would you prefer to be the person making the decision that somebody else goes overboard? And he said, I don't want to be the monster that decides somebody else has got to die. Let's have a conference. So we had ARC. And we've had one in Australia, 2 in London, 1 in Bavaria. Can we get a movement going that encourages better thinking? I hope so. Anyway, that's another story. The depopulation bomb, in very simple terms, hits a country when their birth rate drops, it seems to me, to about 1.1 per woman. Replacement rate's 2.1. That's replacement rate for a stable population. China is actually leading the depopulation bomb. Do we know what that's going to mean? No, we don't. We do know it means that they will run into massive social and economic problems over time. Because if you don't have young people supporting an older population, who's going to do the work? Who's going to pay the taxes? Who's going to provide the government of the day? Who's going to do the services? Who's going to man the aged people's homes? And it's estimated that China's population of, I think it's 1.4 billion today, may very well be down to somewhere between 600 and 800 million by the end of this century. So young people being born today will see China roughly half. Arithmetically, I still haven't got my mind completely around it. Once you get down to about 1.11, your population goes into free fall, you can't get it back. All sorts of interesting things come up. Now, there are about 10 countries in that bracket now. Japan's there, South Korea's there, Italy's there, a few other countries. Even India's population has started to decline. Unbelievable. Australia enters the depopulation bomb in the 2030s. We're not far off it. France's is so serious that it is estimated that within a few short decades there will be no French workers. There will be guest workers or migrants doing the work, making the Peugeots, manning the nuclear power stations, whatever it is, for the old French people that are still left. Very high immigration in Australia, and your young listeners, particularly, you will have some people who might be temporarily or permanently not working on the farm. They're working in Brisbane or in a city somewhere. We know that this issue of mass migration and housing prices is really worrying them. They've linked the two in their minds, understandably. And yet, here's the rub. We've created a society where fewer and fewer Australian young couples are thinking about having a family. The answer to high immigration, in a way, I think people will get this, is to say, well, we don't need to bring so many people in to do the work and build an economy and provide taxpayers. We should be having more of our own. That's probably a hot thing to say, but there is a certain logic to it. And yet, housing affordability is one of the things that's breaking young people's confidence in the system. And it's also impacting family formation. We know that.
It's interesting, John. One of the things that I've noticed, because my daughter's 8 now, just about to go on 9, so I've got a whole heap of families that we know at the same age group at school, and there's a surprising number of them that only have one child. Now, I have one child. I only have one, but ours is because of an IVF issue. We could only ever have one. We would have had far more if we could have. But there's a whole large number of them that have just got one child. Possibly there's 2. There's very few that have got more than that. And the common theme that always comes through, because I ask people, why have you had 5 kids? Why have you had 2 kids? What's this? Why didn't you have more? And most of them, the common answer I usually get back from people, John, is number one is kids are expensive, to send them to school, feed them and do all those sorts of things. Buying a house is hard. Most of our money's going in paying our really expensive houses off these days. And the cost of living just keeps going up. So there's a complete structural disincentive for people to have families. And so it's like the chicken and the egg here. If we keep overspending, we keep having immigration running out of control, house prices go up, the cost of living goes up, people start going, well, I've got 1 kid. And now if I've got 2 or 3, and we need everyone to be having more than 2 kids, that's replacement, is people just can't get off the wheel. So they say, oh, it's easier, we'll just have 1, we'll maybe have 2, and then that's it. There's no incentive for young people. And a lot of them are becoming nihilistic now. I mean, I had a chat the other day in at the office with a couple of young Brits, and they've immigrated to Australia. They're both professional and good salaries. And the pair of them in their late 20s said, we're never going to own a house, Ben. It's just not viable. We can't save up the deposit. Now, whether they want to do the work or not to save up and get it is another argument. But still, there's this nihilism in them that there's just no point. Cost of living's gone up. Houses are expensive. It's just not for us. So you can imagine when people don't have a home, they feel nihilistic about the future. It's not conducive to go and have multiple children, is it?
Well, you're dead right. You're dead right. And one of the people I've talked to now a couple of times, Katie Faust, she's a very feisty American. She actually believes that every policy issue that governments look at should be evaluated through the lens of what does it mean for our future, and our children are our future. So what does it mean for kids? Defence, economics, trade policy, tax policy, childcare policy, all of it. What does it really mean for the kids? Not what suits adults now. And maybe she's got a point. Funnily enough, I introduced a thing. It worked quite well, actually, once we'd introduced it, where every submission to Cabinet had to have a regional impact statement attached to it. What will this mean for the regions? Because sometimes there would be unintended effects. Maybe the time's come to do that for putative parents and for their kids. There's no easy answers to the issues you've just raised, but you are absolutely spot on that these are the sorts of issues as a culture we need to address, and we need to insist that our politicians address. And let's just say I think they could do a better job, Ben.
Yeah, I think they could. And we just don't have this family orientation in the thought process. So in my business, John, I deal with what we call high-performing families. And I know in the rural space, one of the major reasons why farms stop transitioning intergenerationally is family breakdown. So you can have the best farm in the world, the most profitable, the most scale, but if the family unit breaks down, those family relationships break down, then the farm is ultimately lost. That's what happens. And so I think across society, it's the same thing. And I sense that, and I'm very passionate about this side, is if you promote family and the value of family, so have someone having your back, the benefits of acting as a family, the moral and values around being a solid family and relationships, that will then flow through to community, that'll flow through to country, etc. And I think the narrative we need to be starting to talk about is actually the value of family versus the value of the individual, because we are I sense in a very me-based society. We could have a conversation for 2 days over, social media and this hedonism type flavor through things. But if we get back to talking about family and we start promoting ideas around family, I mean, a lot of those Eastern European blocks, that's what they're based on. And their economies, when you look at it, are thriving, and they don't have a population bomb, do they?
Well, that's actually true, although very few populations are actually expanding outside sub-Saharan Africa and certain parts of the Middle East. But everything you've said is true. And I'd add an observation that in my sort of professional life, in public life and since, I've got to know quite a few people who work with farm succession and small business succession. They'll all say just what you said. There's two sides to the coin, actually. One is, if you want a farm succession plan to work, keep your family together. The other is, if you want your family to stay together and you're on the land, start early on your succession planning. A lot of farm families break up over farm succession, feelings of injustice, what have you. And I'd say two things. I'd say to my generation of mothers and fathers out there, if you haven't thought it through properly, do it. Stop putting it off. Get it sorted. And I'd say to young people, drop your overdone sense of entitlement. If your mum and dad have got something to give you, be thankful for it. But don't over-expect and don't think that somehow or other you have a God-given right to a bit of land or family wealth, because a lot of the people you went to school with and lived in your own local community and so forth have got no such thing. So drop the sense of entitlement and keep a sense of proportion.
Yeah. And the two components, John, for me, is I've noticed over the years is you have to have strength of the family relationships or the unit, and you have to have financial strength. And what I mean by that is good, robust governance around your financial side. You have to have financial knowledge, understanding, live within your means, be savvy with your financial side. And so if we take that across to the society and we say, well, we have to have strong relationships and value each other, but also have a strong financial governance within the country. That's the two components we need to be, in my sense, we need to be focusing on.
I agree with you, by the way. I agree. You said society. I would say, yeah, government too. This is the point. We need that around the cabinet table, and we just haven't been getting it.
No, definitely not. No. Now, John, for anyone listening, they're going to be there's a few of them probably sitting there going, geez, Ben, this is not your normally optimistic, positive outlook of the future. Now, I've got a couple of ideas where I think there's a real brightness on the horizon. But from your point of view, John, what is the brightness on the horizon? What is the opportunity or the optimistic view of the future?
Two things, and they're related. One is that there is a stirring in the soul of the nation. There are good people everywhere starting to say, gee, this is getting serious, and we better be engaged. We better get across it. We better understand what's happening. That is happening. There is a pushback against wokeism, no doubt about that. And the second related issue is that I have to say to you that I think the cream of Generation Z, as the Yanks would call it, Generation Z, we might say, which I think the oldest of them are now 29. So it's hard to know. I mean, they're the ones that have been badly affected, we know this now, by the advent of smartphones on the playground and all that sort of stuff. And don't laugh if you think that's funny. It's not funny.
Oh, no, God, no. No, I've got an 8-year-old. It's deadly serious.
It's deadly serious. And since we can track it, 2011-12, smartphones hit the playground. Screens hit young people in a big way. Playtime gave way to phone time. And it has led to this horrendous surge in mental health issues amongst young people. So it really does matter. However, the ones that have made it through, perhaps they're the most resilient, the most insightful. I have to say, they're outstanding. The cream. I got asked back to my old college. I went to the University of Sydney a while ago to speak, do the sort of the dinner time speech that they have occasionally. And then I met a whole heap of them afterwards, and I thought, wow, if we can hold the country long enough to get this lot into positions of leadership, we'll turn the place around quite quickly. I'm only talking about the cream. Some of your listeners will say, I teach, I know how desperate the situation is and all the rest of it. I know we've lost a lot of our kids. I know that 40%, that's the statistics tell us. It's the same in America, Canada, New Zealand, Britain, Australia. Around 40% of our kids have anxiety or depression or mental health problems. I know it's serious. I'm talking about the cream. And that's what we need. We need leadership. We need those elite positions, if you like. You're always going to have leadership. So you want the right elites if you've got to have elites, I think is what I'd say. And I do think the best of the best coming through, they're outstanding, especially some of those country kids that have been raised out there with a sense of proportion. Country needs them.
Yeah, definitely. And it sort of ties into what I heard Joe Rogan say this first, and it was tough times create tough men. Tough men create soft times. Soft times create weak men create hard times, and we go through. And I look at my grandfather, what he went through, and my great-grandfather and my dad, my dad's roughly your age. John and...
That's a horrifying thought. The poor old bloke. Tell him I sympathise.
And so I think we're heading into this tough time. Like that's where for a lot of kids we're in. And I agree with you. I think this is going to create iron sharpens iron. The best diamonds are forged under pressure. And I think we're going to see a generation coming through. And I sense it's going to be my daughter's generation. I see in her as she's coming through and her friends, if we can create those skills around mental resilience and toughness and community, etc., which I'm infusing in my daughter now, I think they're going to see all the excesses of the world and they're going to see it from the outside. And I see a very bright future when they come through. And I think, John, I think they're going to say enough's enough. And they're going to see it for what it is because they're outside of it. And I think that's where we'll see that, the tough people rise to the top. And I think that's when we're going to see a big change in things. So I've got a very positive outlook that will happen.
Some of them are the victims of the things that we've created, haven't done well enough. I agree with you. I just would want to add the rider that you want them to be tough people with a very profound sense of fair play and justice, not just in it for themselves.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I would hope that would be the case for sure, John. And I know I'm trying to instill a very good, solid sense of family and community and fairness in my daughter. And I'm hoping that that's will be coming through from everyone else as well. Perfect. Now, John, we're out of time now. I could talk about this stuff for ages, and I know you could too. I've been really grateful for this. 2 things before we wind up. The first one is, where can people find more about you online? I'm a big fan of the podcast. Can you just share that quickly? And then I've got one last quick question for you.
johnanderson.net.au, or just Google my name and wade your way through the Western country and Western singers in America and you'll find me.
Perfect. And Conversations with John Anderson is the podcast. Millions of views. I enjoy it. It's a real intellectual listen. I enjoy that, but most of the time it's explained in very common language, which I appreciate. Now, John, the question I like to ask all my guests, we like to reflect on things and share wisdom back to the younger generation. If you could jump in a time machine, John, go back to, say, when you were in your mid-20s, say around 25, and you could tap young John on the shoulder, sit him down for a beer or a cup of coffee, what's the bit of advice you'd be giving him?
Well, at 25, I didn't know that only a couple of years later I was going to end up meddling in federal politics. And in preparation for that in life in general, I think I would probably adopt the motto that Dan Crenshaw, he's a Republican in America, is a former SEAL, did time in Afghanistan and the Middle East. And he's adopted the SEAL motto: do everything you can to not give offence and double those efforts to not take offence. We're also precious. We get on our high horses when somebody has a bit of a shot at us. So we all need to avoid giving. Doesn't mean you don't engage in an honest debate or try and call out bad arguments. But let's try and not give offence to one another, and let's try very hard not to take it. Then we might be able to have a serious conversation about the real challenges confronting us.
Yeah, I love that, John. That's very wise. Well, look, my friend, really appreciated this today. I think we'll all get a lot out of it. We'll be putting this podcast out. Anyone that's looking to listen to something a little bit different to what they normally listen to around cows and tractors and production or crime stories, I think that's what a lot of farmers seem to listen to, a lot of crime stories in the tractor. Check out Conversations with John Anderson. He's got a great array of guests, some really deep thinkers, and I think you'll really enjoy the process. John, thank you so much for your time, mate. I appreciate everything you do, and thank you for sharing with us today.
Well, Ben, it's been a privilege, and I'm so glad that somebody thoughtful like you is providing great channels for people in the bush.
Well, everyone, that was a little bit of a different podcast to what we're normally used to, but I think we talked about a lot of topics which I think are really important to not only Australia as a company, but also to us as families going forward. It's a little bit different. Wasn't my usual optimistic or trying to find the optimistic side of things, but that's just part of life. Not everything has to be rainbows and unicorns. If you enjoyed it, make sure you drop me a message on the socials or drop me an email, ben@thefinancialbloke.com.au. And if you thought it was an interesting listen, make sure you share it with your family and friends. Now, John's podcast is incredibly popular all around the world. It's quite often a deep listen. I really enjoy it. If you're wanting something to sort of bite off and chew fairly hard, it'll be a great podcast for you. He does a good job and he's a pretty good bloke. Anyway, guys, like us on the socials, share it with your family and friends. Give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you can, to help us share the wealth and wisdom. And we'll see you next time.